This is JCU Conversations, a podcast show from James Cook University, Singapore. Tune in as we ask experts in the industry more about their lives and their approach to success. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Let's listen to today's episode.
This is JCU Conversations, a podcast show from James Cook University, Singapore, where we engage experts in the industry to learn more about their lives and their approach to success. Hello, my name is Nicola Hodgman, and in my role as an Associate Director at James Cook University, Singapore, I work across a number of special projects. Our guest today is Mr. Bill Tweddell. Mr. Tweddell has been the Chancellor of James Cook University since 2016. He's the university's 5th Chancellor and the first JCU alumnus to be elected to the role. Welcome, Bill, and thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much, Nicola. I'm delighted to be invited along.
Now, Bill, I'm going to take you back in time, if that's okay. So you graduated from JCU in Townsville, I believe?
I did indeed.
And then you actually worked for JCU for a while. So how was that experience, moving from a student to go and actually work at the institution?
Look, it was terrific. I'd started in the library, my first full-time job, and then I'd moved from that, where I was in charge of interlibrary loans. Then I moved across into the administration, where my formal job was to be head of graduate admissions, but often because of vacancies, I had to fill in as the publications officer. So that took me through till about the end of 1975. And I'd always been interested in international relations and politics. And my role in the administration meant that I looked after foreign affairs department officers who came to the university and other universities recruiting. Remember, there were only 17 universities then. There's now something like 40. So one of those people was a fellow called Tony Werner, and I looked after him in 1974 and just talked to him about the job and what it was like, and sort of trailed my coat a little about whether I might be the sort of person they look for. Tony thought not, so I didn't care too much about that. Everything was hard copy in those days, so I kept my hard copy application and left it on the veranda of my house out in Kerwin, and left it. And the next year, somebody else came through, a fellow called Bill Fisher. By then, I was on the cusp of getting my second degree, my economics degree, and I had the same conversation with Bill, and he encouraged me to apply. I did apply. It was an arduous, drawn-out process, a preliminary interview in Brisbane, 3 or 4 days of interviews and grilling in Canberra, essay writing, psychological testing. Amazingly, I passed that. All that sort of stuff. And I remember the freezing cold. I wore the warmest thing I had, which was a suit for big occasions. Got in late on an August night and had to walk I guess about half a mile to find somewhere to eat at that time of night. And I never remember before or since being quite so cold. But, so they did all the things, extensive character tests and that sort of stuff. I remember Joe Baker, who's one of the great icons of James Cook University, as you know. He was a foundation staff member and so forth. And Joe was then head of AIMS. And I put him down as one of my referees to be spoken to about for my security clearance. And I got a call from Joe once, and he just sort of said he had this lovely way of speaking. He said, Bill, a couple of men in suits have come to see me about you. And I told them a lot of things. And I said, well, what were they like, Joe? And he said, well, almost human. Those were people from ASIO. And then I had the training year. I got in. I think I was the only Queenslander chosen out of, I think it was 35. And it was unusually, there were 20 men, 15 women, which was a higher proportion of women than is usually given credit for back in that day. And some of the real talents were the women. We were all very nervous in that training year, because you might recall that the Fraser government had come in at the end of 1975 after the sacking of Whitlam. We'd been recruited under the Whitlam government and came in under Fraser. Now, that's not a political statement. It's just that when Mr. Fraser became Prime Minister, he froze all recruitment into the public service. Many, including me, I'd resigned my job, I'd sold my house and so forth. And the department very bravely said, no, we'll hang on to these people. but there was a persistent rumour that all or some of us would be punted. We'd be thrown back out again. And I was elected by the students to go and speak to management about this, and would we be all thrown out? And if not all of us, would there be a new order of merit, or would we be thrown out on the order of merit that we were selected on? All these nervous questions, but we hung on. And so, yeah, and 2 other graduates from James Cook applied at the same time, and sadly they weren't successful, but went on to have very good careers elsewhere. So look, I think really that it was a career, what I was seeking and what I got was a job that really tested me, not just intellectually, which I think is important, but also in terms of variety of experience, my adaptability, my flexibility in different situations. Overall, I figured out that I had 23 shifts in that time over the 40 years. I had 8 full-time postings. I was Chief of Staff to the Foreign Minister for a couple of years. And the house I'm now living in Townsville is the place I've stayed longest as an adult anywhere, because I've now been here a bit over 5 years. So that was it, but I loved it.
A very transient but remarkable career, and thank you for that quick overview. There are a few things that sort of jump out at me, and I happen to know that that you did meet Her Majesty the Queen when she actually came to JCU to in 1970, and I wonder if meeting the Queen might have inspired you to get onto that world stage.
No, actually, I don't see a connection. In fact, I wasn't fortunate enough to meet her. That's a standing family joke, because my wife had just started, well, not my wife then, but my wife had just started university that year, and she was one of the bright young, commerce students and others chosen to meet Her Majesty in the library. Now, at that time, I worked at the library, so my wife got to hobnob with the royal family, and I got to be an usher. So I didn't get to meet the Queen until I was Deputy High Commissioner in London, in the period 2002 to 2005.
You didn't cut the mustard until then.
No, I was just a flunky, but my wife was the star attraction.
So you needed to earn your stripes on the way up to one up your wife.
Chris might even shoot me for saying this, but she was always worried that she may have broken royal protocol by talking to the Queen before the Queen spoke. You're not meant to do that. And then when Chris met the Queen again in the early 2000s, at Buckingham Palace with me, I said, "Did she mention that episode?" She said, "No." So I said, "Darling, I think you're forgiven."
Oh, fantastic. And of course, the time that you were in the UK as Deputy High Commissioner was quite a tumultuous time, I believe. It was just after during the 2002 bombings.
I had the lot, actually. I was there from 2002 to 2005. So I was there, yes. I was there for the bombings on the Underground. And you might remember that in that episode, of course, one Australian, when there was a displaced attack on a bus by one of the terrorists, a person killed in that attack was an Australian and of Vietnamese origin, as it happens. And I mentioned that because they later went on to be ambassador to Vietnam. But so that was, as you can imagine, a horrifying experience. And of course, if something catastrophic happens in Britain, there is bound to be Australians involved. So when that happened, we had to deploy quickly, people around all the hospitals. The communications were very, disrupted, as you'd expect, because everybody's phoning hither and yon. So we had to dispatch people out to the various hospitals to check on Aussies, and you never do know. We found in one of the other disasters, I'm sorry I'm digressing, but there was a train crash at Potter's Bar sometime earlier than that, and we checked any Aussies. No Aussies. The police authorities told us, the British police. Then we saw an interview of Prince Charles talking to somebody with a broad Aussie accent in a hospital bed, but she'd been travelling on a British passport, as so often they do. The lesson from that, of course, was that you don't rely on that sort of information. You get people out into the field, and that's a bit of a challenge, because you never know. Aussies are a broad church.
Yeah, absolutely. Aussies everywhere, and not least our beautiful Aussie community in Singapore and our Singaporean friends. And I do think that some of these experiences must really have shaped your leadership skills, honed your leadership skills. And, you know, leadership is obviously always topical, but particularly so in the world at the moment. And I just wondered if you might have any advice for our community around, you know, how one does develop these leadership skills, and how, and the responsibility of using those skills appropriately.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. That's a good question, Nicola. That's what people always say when they're trying to think of a clever answer. But I do think it is a very good question. I think the starting point is to say that leaders aren't only bosses, if you know what I mean. I mean, there are leadership roles well below CEO or whatever it might be. Now, let me unpack that a little bit. So I think I was very lucky to find myself in leadership positions fairly early. Even at JCU in the early 70s, I was, as I said before, in charge of interlibrary loans, in charge of graduate admissions and so forth. Small beer, but still starting on the bottom rungs of leadership positions. Then when I joined DFAT, or DFA as it was then, I pretty quickly found myself in leadership roles. I joined in 76. In the early 80s, I was head of the Ministerial and Cabinet Liaison section. I went on to be head of the political section and Deputy High Commissioner in New Delhi, head of the the Hong Kong, Macau and Taiwan section, et cetera, et cetera. So I had, you know, I was lucky to get those sorts of experiences pretty early. And I think about halfway through my career, I was promoted into the senior executive service, which is sort of like the ambassadorial rank. So, you know, so then from then on in both Canberra and then abroad, I was able to exercise leadership roles in various high commissions and embassies and consulates general. Just on very quickly on that, I mean, people often ask the difference between an embassy and a high commission. Well, it's a very simple thing. A high commission is in a Commonwealth country, and an ambassador, you know, embassy is in a non-Commonwealth country. So if I had been posted in Singapore, which I was never lucky enough to be, but I was in Sri Lanka, for example, I was High Commissioner. When I was sent to head our positions in Manila and in Hanoi, of course, I was ambassador because they're not Commonwealth countries. And the further wrinkle is that when I was sent to Hong Kong, which is a pretty big mission, I was consul general, because that's what you are if you're the head of a mission not in a capital city. So if you're in New York, for example, or if you're in Los Angeles or Hong Kong, you're a consul general. So that's sorry about the digression, but I think that's just to say that leadership roles came pretty quickly. So yeah, and I'm very grateful for that. I'm grateful for people who saw that potential in me. Is your question partly about what you think makes a good leader?
Well, I guess, and how you draw on those skills in times of you know, where people are really looking to you to shape a response and to you know, roll the sleeves up. It must be quite a challenge.
Look, a couple of things here. Defining leadership is tricky. I mean, it's aligning people with a vision and leading them, you know, taking them in the direction that's identified. That's, I guess, one way of putting it. But I think the keys are be honest and authentic. You know, that's your first thing. If you don't know, you don't know. Don't fake it. People will tell a mile away. You know, be honest, admit when you don't know the answer, then endeavour to find it. Rely on the team around you and trust their strengths. That's all honest and authentic. Play to your strengths, hire to your weakness. You can't be an expert at everything. So, you know, play to the things you know you're good at, or other people tell you you're good at, so that objectivity is there. And fill the gaps with people around you. If you're a CEO, of course, you can do that by hiring. If not, you have other ways of doing it in the public sector, for example. So that's that. Work at being a good communicator. Effective communications is the cornerstone, I think, of successful teams and leaders. That includes active listening and plain speaking. On that point also, it's important to take care to steer, but not discourage others from putting forward their views. By that I mean, if I say, look, folks, I think we should do X, what do you think? Two sorts of people don't come forward. The lazy people, you know, who think, oh yeah, whatever, you know, he's getting the big pay. Or the people who think, oh, look, I had another way of looking at that, but he seems hell-bent on it, so I'll hush my mouth. You miss that talent. And on the first of them, I believe, don't let them off the hook. Don't let people think, I'll just sit this one out, I'll coast, because often those are people who really have something to offer. So you've got to bring them out. So the open question, build rapport with your team. The time you take to, I think this comes to your point well, the time you take to build your reputation as a leader, as being one who consults and does value everyone, gives you credit for the day, and the day does come where you can't be quite so consultative. You have to say, guys, I'll explain it all later, but let's get cracking and do this, because sometimes, sometimes you just have to do that. Follow me out of the trench and I'll tell you all about it later on. And that's, I think, this question of mutual respect. I think the final thing, and there's many more things you could say, is you never stop learning. The Vietnamese, who are wonderful people, have a lovely, succinct expression about education being a lifelong process. It's hoc mai. That means forever learning. And no matter what stage of life you're in, and I'm now in my 70s, you can still learn more. I'm still learning. I'm learning from people 1/7 of my age still. And just be open to new possibilities and let life take you in sometimes very surprising directions.
Some wonderful, wonderful messages in there, I think. And while we're thinking about some of those lovely positives, obviously your travels, your career have taken you far and wide, and you've referenced some lovely spots there. Is a diplomat allowed to have a favourite?
It's a bit like your favourite child, isn't it?
Yeah.
No, I will try to answer that. I don't. What I've just said isn't meant to evade the question. Look, I think we had sort of 8 long-term overseas postings, and they were terrific. And in addition to that, I had a couple of short-term ones, Nicola and in Dar es Salaam. So I've been a very lucky fellow. All of them, I had Bangladesh, Greece, India, Sri Lanka, Hong Kong, UK, Vietnam, the Philippines, and the ones I've mentioned, the short-term ones. They had great features, professionally and personally. One of our sons was born in Greece. The other elder one likes to say that he was conceived in Bangladesh, but that's a hard thing to prove. But I tried to focus my career on Asia. 6 of the 8 were in Asia. The 2 outside Asia I didn't ask for, but one happily was in Athens and the other one was in London. So I can tell people I've stayed in Asia except to go to the birthplace of democracy and the birthplace of parliamentary democracy. That makes it sound more preordained than it actually was. But so getting to the question, look, I think Chris, who's been, Chris is a JCU graduate. She's been with me now 49 years. She and I would agree that our top 3 would be the United Kingdom, India, and Hanoi. Splitting them, and Vietnam, splitting them up is fairly pointless. And I've just mentioned, of course, your first posting is always terribly special. And that, in our case, was Bangladesh. Your first ambassadorial job for me was Sri Lanka, of course, important. Your last posting, you're sentimental about, and that was the Philippines. So all of them were great, but seeing you've asked the question, I think those would be the top 3.
And I think one thing that is consistent throughout your very varied career of, with diplomacy and foreign policy and is people. That seems to be the theme. It's all about relationships. Would that be your assessment? That's
very true. I think that's it. And that's what I like about it. I think that's in a way why this was a job that appealed to me, because I'm interested in the ideas. I'm really to be, what an ideal combination to be working on the formulation and execution of Australia's foreign trade and aid policies. I mean, that in itself is extremely intellectually interesting, but also to be working always among such incredibly interesting people. Because, one thing that comes with being in the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, you're building links with other departments in Australia. You're building links with the rest of the Australian community. Of course you are, because you're privileged to be able to represent them in overseas environments and to be trying to shape policy to advance their interests. So that's one thing. but the rich, the rich environment of people you meet overseas, the talented people in other countries, the talented people in foreign ministries, the people you rub shoulders with in a village in Bangladesh or Vietnam or something like that. It's an extraordinary opportunity to meet incredibly interesting and talented people. You've nailed it there. I think that is really one of the great things about the role. Yeah.
Well, I think I know that JCU is incredibly proud of you, proud of that you were a staff member and alumnus and our first local boy chancellor, and I think some of the insights that you've provided to our community are just fantastic, and we really thank you for that, and we thank you for your service to our university. Bill, look, thank you just so much for joining us and for your generosity of time, as always, for all that you do for the university. And if there's anything to our wonderful community you want to convey, please do so. But
look, yeah, thank you for that. It's been my great joy, and thank you for the honour of inviting me to participate in this. I think you can see here that there's wonderful symmetry around beginning my working life in JCU in the 60s and 70s, and my career has spanned 4 decades of service to my country as a foreign policy professional. Then I was able to come full circle and to allow me to give back to the university, which gave me so much by being its first chancellor. It's been, by any measure, a fortunate life.
Thank you, Bill.